Hello, everyone. Welcome to Black Men Speak. I'm your co-host, DJ Stewart.
And I'm your co-host, the Tommy D. Duncan III, otherwise known as TD3. Jimmy, it is Wednesday, November 23rd, 2022. Jimmy, with this Wednesday night.
It's Black Men Speak. So, Tom, let's do this. Let's give a big shout out to Liquid for providing our theme music. And would ask everyone, if you haven't already, please subscribe to our channel. Please like the videos and then share and spread the word as we try to grow the channel this year. Um, And also, Tom, you may have noticed that I'm not 100%. I'm a little bit under the weather, so I'll be talking a little slower so I can talk and keep enough air in my lungs at the same time. With
Gotcha.
that being said, Tom, let's get into our topic for tonight.
All right, and just as an FYI, your background is a little bit dark, Jimmy. I don't know if it's the lighting in the room, but just
It's the
wanted to give
lighting,
you a
Tom.
heads up.
I
But
have poor lighting. I have
right,
poor lighting. And plus, I
all
turned some of it down because I want y'all to see how hideous I look tonight.
right, Jimmy. But we're going to continue on the conversation that we started last week. Thank you for joining us, ladies and gentlemen, all over the world, to Black Men Speak, the most provocative show of intelligent conversation on issues having to do with our community. And Jimmy, we started last week having a conversation about a couple of different things that were somewhat different but had an alignment within our community. We started out with, of course, the all boys prep school in Chicago. And then we ended that conversation with the Kyrie Irving versus the NBA drama that has been unfolding for about a month now. And we are going to dig a little bit deeper. We started the conversation, but we didn't finish the conversation.
Right.
And, you know, he has been reinstated so that he can play in the NBA with the New Jersey Nets, Jimmy, but the conversation is not over. And so that is our topic tonight. Why Kyrie is back, but the conversation isn't over. What has Black America learned, and where do we need to go moving forward? Because this, in my opinion, Jimmy, has pretty significant implications. It isn't as if we've not seen this before from institutions and or corporations when it comes to individuals or groups within our community, based, entirely on a country, interestingly enough, on freedom of speech. But Jimmy, if you say certain things, which he didn't say anything, or even if you tweet certain things, there could be an issue.
Well, Tom, I think this points to a bigger picture that a problem that we've always had in America. We still, I give America a great deal of brownie points for the progress that we've made. But let's face it, Tom, there are some that are still threatened by seeing any kind of dominant play by black men. It's okay for you to use your dynamic talent on a basketball court or a football field or a baseball diamond. But when it comes to the classroom, to that boardroom, to Wall Street, that's a different story. I think the powers that are in power now, who may feel a little threatened by the emergence of black men, have done everything possible historically, from the destruction of the schools, starting with Paul Dunbar High School, to the destruction even recently of Chicago Urban Prep, which was pretty much focused on educating young black boys, helping them transition into men and go off to college and graduate. So just graduating high school wasn't good enough, Tom. They set the bar really high. And I think what Urban Prep showed was what what we were told was that young black boys are hard to educate. It proved that the naysayers were wrong, and that they're not hard to educate. And then it come. Then we continue on. We segue into Kyrie. What did Kyrie really get in trouble for, Tom? We're talking about a movie that he put a link in on a tweet, and I know Kyrie is probably the highest celebrity because this movement of Black Israelites has been around for a while. This is nothing new, but this has probably been the loosest and the highest celebrity to endorse that movement and thinking in modern history. And it seemed like a great deal of effort is being extended to shut him down and to shut this message down. I haven't seen this much pushback even for those who push the black Jesus. I mean, the black Jesus is more tolerated than a black Jew. To say that the children of Moses, that God's chosen people, the Hebrewites were black, causes this much trouble, this much energy, it has to be shut down. That message can't even be put out there for any kind of public debate. Tom, I'm one for the believing that when you have theories like this, let's bring forth all of the information, all the scholarly papers, all the white papers. And I've seen a few, and the research to me seems legitimate, but I'm not a professional researcher. Yeah, I'm just a guy who likes to learn stuff and read white papers. But let's put it all on the table, Tom, and examine it and vet it, and let people decide for themselves how much of this they believe or not. I've seen some numbers that suggest that as many as 65% of the slaves that came to America, not the West Indies, not South America, but to America, were descendants of these Hebrew slaves who were never really accepted as Africans because you know, because they were different. I mean, the Africans never really accepted them as brothers and sisters, so it was easy to sell them into slavery first as a means to um, create and foster trade with the Europeans. But Tom, look how much energy has been extended to shut this man down. And then, like I said, recently I saw the founder of Nike make the comment that Kyrie had gone across the line. For what? For a link to a movie?
Well, Jimmy, you bring up some very salient and interesting points. Again, after Kyrie Irving, submitted this tweet, he was immediately accosted by the media, and then, of course, by the NBA, Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, and
Excuse
those who
me.
sit behind certain doors pushed out for an immediate apology. And of course, Kyrie Irving, in essence, backed up and said, for what? And, not directly saying that, but he said, if I know who I am, I cannot be what you consider to be anti Semitic. But they asked for an immediate apology and or him denouncing any form of anti-Semitism. Nothing wrong with that in principle, but they didn't really want to listen to what he had to say.
Correct.
Everybody was looking for a soundbite so that they could attack him, Jimmy. And this isn't the first, 10th, or 100th time that this has happened to an athlete, especially within our community. And you bring up a very interesting point with Phil Knight. I'd forgotten about the fact that I believe they cut off his shoe line or selling his shoes to the general public. And let's have a conversation about that. If Phil Knight thinks that Kyrie Irving has crossed the line because of a tweet that he made, the question really then becomes, Jimmy, it's not just what Phil Knight thinks about that or those folks who are in a position of power think about that, but what does the Black community think about that? Because
The
the
black
question is,
community is ignorant of. I think we've heard the story. I don't think most black people know all of the details of the story. I don't think we've been told what's central to all of this is the fact that there are some in the power structure in the Jewish community that took offense to the claim. And this is not anything that's new. Like I said, the Black Hebrews have been around for a very long time. This is not a new group. I mean, this is a movement that's very old, and they've always made the same claim that they are the descendants, that most black people here in America are the descendants of Black Hebrews, that Israel, the European Jews who occupy Israel today are not God's chosen people. So that is the issue. Is that someone dares speak out against the orthodoxy and say that the chosen people, that God's chosen people are not the European Jews in Israel, but yet they are the Black Americans. They're the Black folks here in America. That they are the true descendants of those of those Israelites.
Okay, so we have a couple of different lines of conversation because the question is assuming that number one, that particular community is monolithic and they all think alike. And the question is there one voice that speaks for all of that community? The same question would be, is there one voice that speaks for all of our community? Because in doing some of my research, there are not just one, but multiple voices within that community. Some of them rabbis who don't believe that Mr. Irving has done anything wrong.
Right.
In what he tweeted and in everything that they researched on his purported malfeasance using his Twitter account. And so unless there is one community that speaks for the entire voice of that community, the question is, who are we listening to and why is it that they are important? Why is their voice so important that it dominates every other voice? But let's back up a little bit. And I want to make sure that we don't miss this because, Jimmy, at the end of the day, we live in America. It comes down to economics and power. Typically, it doesn't come down to right or wrong in terms of an intellectual debate or in terms of facts. It comes down to economics and power because we're talking about capitalism. And so if we talk about the position that's taken by Nike, we're going to cut off Kyrie Irving's shoe line, which means we're going to cut off his money. Right. Well, all that being said, Jimmy, is I don't know the exact numbers, but I can guarantee you that the Black community contributes an inordinate amount of revenue and profit for the Nike Corporation.
I would ask that we stop.
Exactly. And so my question is this. For those of you who are listening, did you know about Phil Knight's comments? Do you know about Nike's position? And if Phil Knight and or Nike can say, you know what, we're going to cut you off, we're going to cut your revenue off, then how much esteem does the Black community have, given that we don't have all one voice, if you're going to cut off our economics or his economics because he's one of ours? We have an economic wherewithal as well when it comes to consumerism, Jimmy, and we talked about this many times. We are the most prolific consumers probably in human history. And I guarantee you, if the Black community were to say, you know what, we're not going to buy any Nike shoes until you change your position. I don't care if they're Jordans. I don't care whose shoes they are. Right. You know, since you are going to try to cause pain to one of ours, we don't have to continue to support your organization, Mr. Knight, or you directly, Mr. Knight.
Well, Tom, what would be even better if Kyrie used some of his wealth combined with the wealth of some others who be willing to invest and create your own shoe company.
Yep.
You know, you don't necessarily have to buy Nike, Adidas, or any other shoe company out there. Black folks are certainly capable at this point in today's age of developing their own product, Tom. And Kyrie can endorse his own product at that point. That would be the scoring move. But Tom, that wouldn't happen because I'm pretty sure they'd find a way to bounce them out of the NBA for even thinking that way. The relationship between the shoe companies and the NBA is immense. And it doesn't seem like there's so much money involved that relationship is not going to be disrupted. So like you said, in the end, it does come down to economics. It's not about truth. You know, it's not about the fact that you force this man to kind of go against his principle. And he can't feel good about himself, Tom, for having to retreat the way he did simply to go back to work. But I do understand as a Black person, and this historically has happened to us before. We've had to do very indignant things just in order to fit in and get along with white people in this country. And this is just a modern day version of that.
And Jimmy, if you say the wrong things, even if you're right, then you'll run the risk of what you call being canceled, what I'll call in layman's terms being silenced. And that was what they have been in seeking to do with Kyrie Irving. Now, I'm not saying that you have to agree with Kyrie Irving on everything that he does or everything that he says, but let's be very clear, Jimmy. We as a community of people have to reestablish the fact that we should be serving our interests first, which is what every other group of people who is focused on survival, to your point, Jimmy, self-preservation, first law of self-preservation is survival and prosperity. Every other group understands this. Every other group is very clear about this. And our community has to understand that as a part of that code of conduct to self-preservation and survival, there are economic interests, there are political interests, which drive social interest, and then every other area interest after that. And so, again, if Nike wants a fight, if Black America wants to, we can give them a fight. And that's not and that's that's not just spending $150 to $200 on a pair of shoes at a minimum, Jimmy, but those who are investors in Nike shares as well.
Yeah, they don't want to fight, Tom. And they have no reasonable belief that there's going to be a fight. Why? Because they don't believe that Black people even care. That we are so not bonded together under a single cause. We have no sense of group survival. We don't look out for our children. We don't look out for our women. So why should we look out for Kyrie? You know, they see the stats. They see the information. They understand what's at play here. And if there was any chance whatsoever that this was going to impact them financially, Mr. Knight wouldn't have made the statement. Nor would the NBA be taking the position they're taking, or some of these Jewish groups taking the position that they're taking. They're doing this, Tom, one, because they want to shut this down and make sure that no one else of a celebrity status dare cross, as Mr. Knight say, cross the line and get out of your lane. And if you do, we want to show you just how much he who giveth the wealth to you can take it back.
And this is what you call, Jimmy, an example of a high-profile, digital, personal, and economic lynching. But, Jimmy, we also have to understand that there are interests and there are groups and there are pockets out there, whether they are individuals, whether there are groups who, of course, are pushing back against this narrative that the NBA, that Adam Silver, I don't know about Phil Knight yet, and or other groups are trying to push against Kyrie Irving. Now, let me be very clear. Kyrie has done what he feels is appropriate so that he can get back to the business of what he does, and that is to take care of his family at the highest level he can economically, which is playing basketball, being able to commit to his team so that he is not a distraction, right, which is staying focused on basketball. And so when we see these follow-on interviews that the journalists are trying to push him to make another statement, to grab another headline, he has been very intelligently staying focused on business, which is basketball. I'm here to talk about basketball. I've said what I needed to say. I'm here to talk about basketball.
I'm glad you didn't fall into the trap at the press conference.
Journalists and reporters are attacking him. Jimmy, it will be very interesting to see what happens when folks turn on reporters and journalists who are attacking him. And the point that I'm trying to make, Jimmy, is that there are 40 to 50 million folks within our community in America. There's one Kyrie. There's obviously a small community of reporters and journalists and or companies and or leagues out there who may be serving their economic interest by attacking Kyrie and making what I would call an example of him, what some may call emasculating him in the public and or the digital domain at the resources that they have available. But again, we are the greatest consumers. We are the most prolific consumers of all time, Jimmy. And so this is where we begin to leverage that power and that prowess against those folks who are attacking ours. Because what we have to be about the business of doing is taking care of our own. We may not always agree with everything, but what we have to acknowledge, Jimmy, is if they can do that to a Kyrie, if they can do that to a Kanye, which we may not agree with everything that he has to say every time, he can do it to any one of us. And whether we are talking about Kyrie, Kanye, whether we go back a few years and talk about a Colin Kaepernick, even if we go back several decades and talk about a Muhammad Ali, or more recently, we talk about what is this other brother who used to play for the Bulls, Craig Hodges,
Yeah.
who was silenced back in his day, Jimmy. This has happened over and over again. And we sit back and we are, I believe, reaching a point, Jimmy, where we've turned a corner and said, you know what? Enough of an institution that we have been giving our time and our money and our resources to. Now it is time that we make intelligent economic and political decisions that are going to benefit our community. We have to leverage our own political capital. We have to leverage our own economic capital. And that's the conversation that we have to have. So when we have these conversations, and we have folks who, I'm calling them out again, Shaq, Barkley, who I can guarantee you had no conversation with Kyrie before they start speaking on behalf of the institute.
Nor do they fully understand what the issue is, Tom.
Exactly.
But let's play devil's advocate here, and let's examine was at the root of this. After World War II, as the world sat back and watched the genocide of European Jews by the Germans, there was a great deal of humanitarian goodwill build up that it's finally time to develop a homeland for Jews. And that was sort of, we're going to do this because when 6 million Jews were being killed by the Germans, the world did very little to stop it. Well, Tom, an argument can be made that for the 20 million
20 to 25 million, 20 to
25 million Africans who were tossed in the oceans. I mean, the sharks would follow the slave ships because it was just a meal in order to enslave 11 million people, only which about 1 million of them actually came to America. The other 10 million were split between the Caribbean and South America. But when a loss is a loss, I'm not trying to say that we suffered more, because that's a foolish argument to be saying, well, you only lost 6 million and we lost 25 million, although the truth is what it is. But if the world can come together to grab land from those who lived on it, Palestinians, the Arabs, whoever, to carve out a homeland out of some guilt for the Holocaust. Tom, what can be done for 25 million people who lost their lives in the Middle Passage? And what have you done to address that when it was going on? And and then to add to that, what would be wrong with at least saying that there is some evidence, and we can debate the evidence, we can vet it, that suggests that that a lot of these people who came and lost their lives in the Middle Passage, who were enslaved here in America, were actually the true chosen people of God. How would that change the attitude of Black people in America who think and believe that we're less than nothing? Who even today believe that we can't educate back Black boys, even though we know that not to be true? I mean, that would be a powerful message, and it seemed like there's only upside with being able to talk about the truth and putting it out there on the table for some debate, as opposed to doing everything you can to shut down one celebrity who happens to make one loose endorsement of a movie that's making that point.
Interesting points, Jimmy. And I mean, you bring up a very salient conversation point because, you talk about who has power and who is a victim of that power. And, in my opinion, I'll make this statement. I think it matters less what some other individual or group for this matter believes. I believe what's more important is, what we believe as a community and what we are willing to do about what we believe as a community. And with all that being said, we do not speak as a monolith because we are not all the same. No one group is the same, but I can guarantee you that, any group of people that has their own self-interest in mind understands that there are going to be certain principles, a code of conduct that is going to dominate that group, creating a culture so that, Jimmy, to your point, when we talk about self-preservation, that is going to dominate your conversation and your actions. And so in this group, you have one group of people based upon the tweet of one individual that felt, I don't know if they really felt this way, that they were being threatened. And so they forced the hand of one individual who played basketball, who tweeted something, to basically have to cave and apologize for a tweet.
Don,
Now,
what's the threat to the Jews?
I understand that.
What's the threat to the European Jews in Israel? Even if, let's say, for sake of argument, if this theory that black people in America are the true descendants of the children of Moses, okay, what changes? The European Jews in Israel are going to pack up and leave and say, okay, black folks, y'all can come here and occupy the land because truly this is your land, not ours. What's going to change? What's going to be disrupted if this theory were found to be true? And I submit to you nothing. Why go through all of this over an issue of identity? Now, I can safely say I'm pretty sure 99.999, you can string out as many nines as you want to, that those Egyptian, the slaves of Egypt building pyramids were not European whites.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure they came from Ethiopia, from the Kush Empire, and up and down the Eastern Africa region. That's where those people came from. So the question of white or black shouldn't even be an issue.
Well, Jimmy, I think the issue is power. And I would agree with you. I don't believe that anything that Kyrie said or did was a true threat to that particular community. But it is an exercise of power, and an exercise of power in such that if you even think about saying or doing anything that might be considered to make any one group uncomfortable, in this case, it was the Jewish community, then they're going to make an example of them, and then they used whatever mechanisms were in place to make an example out of him to ensure that nobody else begins to think of, or say or do anything that even makes them uncomfortable. But I mean, to your earlier point, Jimmy, if we want to talk about uncomfortable, if we want to talk about a genocide, let's not even have a conversation about what a small group of folks in the Native American community looks like in this country and what they might have to say
Correct.
about a genocide or about a Holocaust, because then we would have to talk about what is Independence Day in this country and whose independence are we talking about, and or when we talk about who discovered America and what was discovered if you have an entire civilization of people that has been there for thousands and thousands of years. But I will not digress. The point being is it's an exercise of power and an example being set for anybody who might be thinking a certain way. To your point, Jimmy, you've said this several times, shut up and dribble the ball, shut up and throw the ball, shut up and run the ball. The question is, what does our community have to say about that? Because we have an economic driver and an economic interest that they have to listen to as well, Jimmy. And that's where we have to begin to exercise that economic power and that political power. And the only way we do that is to consolidate, to begin to put our individual interests aside, to look at our collective interest so that we eliminate this from happening, because and that's the real threat, Jimmy, when when any community begins to consolidate and march to the beat of one drummer, that's what they would call a drum line, that is where folks begin to get concerned because they understand the power, the potential power that we have in our thought process, in our economics, in everything creative that we have done in creating anything that has ever existed in this country, everything that has been stolen in most parts of the world to recreate and build systems and economies and institutions.
Well, I would submit that this is a bad strategy for those on the other side. First of all, Black Man Speak is officially calling for a boycott of Nike. Everyone who's listening out there, you spend your money with Nike, please stop. Let's get that shot fired. The other thing, Tom, is that simply because you have the power and authority, when you exercise that authority, first of all, there's an outcome that's going to happen. First of all, the person you're exercising power over has to be subjugated to that authority, and that becomes visible. If you want people to believe that we're free in America and that basketball and professional sports is a viable option for our young Black boys, we know it's not. It's only I think we did a show on it. There was like 7 or 8 full-time jobs in the NBA for 4 years on average each year. But they put the illusion out there. This is a viable avenue for you to keep feeding the pipeline. And then you do this. Then you make Kyrie go back and apologize for something he didn't do, just to work.
And in addition, Jimmy, to the humiliation of a laundry list of items that he had.
Oh yeah, I mean, it wasn't. Yeah,
Jimmy, let's be honest.
Even after he gave in to what you asked for, then you came back with another list of that's not good enough. We want you to do this list here.
Let's call it what it is. Not just that, but extortion. You're going to have to write a check. You're going to have to pay me for a tweet. It's extortion.
On top of that, Tom, he offered $500,000.
I know.
To the Jewish Defamation League. $500,000. And if you were so concerned about anti-Semitic speech, take the money and say we're going to put it to good use. We're going to put some training programs in place. We're going to run some PSAs. No, Tom. They said take your anti-Semitic money and keep it.
Right.
Basically telling the power structure that he hadn't done enough. We don't think he's sincere enough. That nigga just hadn't got on his knees and begged and cried enough for us to forgive him of any kind of blessing by just taking his blood money. I mean, that's basically what it came down to.
And before we move any further, since we're about halfway through, Jimmy, I'd like to thank Miss Marion for joining us tonight on the chat line. I'd like to thank my good friend, Uncle Asar, for joining us as well, longtime support. And he makes a very good point. How should we respond? And he says part of the problem is that we don't respond because we like the sport more than we like our freedom and or our power.
Well, Tom, what freedom?
Okay, what he's pointing to is the willingness to exercise your discipline to withdraw economically from organizations and institutions that don't support or protect you in order to exercise your power, your freedom, to be free.
Kyrie is a multimillionaire. I'm sure he's not hurting for money.
Correct. He's not.
And he was squeezed into his position.
Correct.
But just imagine if it was any one of us working for a company, getting a paycheck, if they did the same thing. Mm-hmm. We'd end up giving in also. Most people would end up caving for that paycheck. And that's the state of where we are today. So where's your freedom, once again, when people can tell you that a man is now a woman who can menstruate, who can breastfeed, who can give birth, and if you say anything against it, like you don't believe it, you can be canceled in this country. Where's your freedom?
You can only be canceled
when your boss can simply come in and say, Tom, I think the comment you made in the meeting last week was anti-Semitic or anti-anything. We want you to take it back and apologize. And you said, well, wait a minute, I wasn't even at that meeting. I didn't say anything. It doesn't matter. I still want you to apologize. And you have no choice but to suck it up and apologize simply to keep your job and a paycheck. So where's the freedom in there?
And that's the point. The point being, Jimmy, in order to achieve your freedom, in order to build and exercise your power, you have to be willing to do some things that are uncomfortable in the short term in order to create that power and the freedom in the long term. And we understand that it may be uncomfortable. And the reason that I'm not saying the only reason, but, Kyrie, for instance, made a decision that he felt was in his family's best interest by making an apology when, quite frankly, he didn't have to because he didn't do anything wrong. And this is not just coming from folks within our community who begin to cave, and we won't talk to all of the voices within our community who was piling on Kyrie until we begin to build momentum. And they got afraid of losing the respect and support of our community. Then they started supporting Kyrie. But let's be very clear, Jimmy. When we exercise our power and are willing to sacrifice the short term for the long term, that is the only way that you are going to create freedom and power. And that's what he's speaking to. And
Right.
that's what Uncle Assar was speaking to.
Right. So we're not there, Tom.
Short term for the long term.
Right. So we're not there at this point because even when you're financially secure, I'm pretty sure that Kyrie does not want to leave a legacy that he's anti-Semitic. Didn't want, when it's time for him to hang up basketball, possibly get a job, as a commentator, color commentator, play-by-play guy, with the networks, for them to be saying, oh, no, we can't hire you, Kyrie, because, you're known for being anti-Semitic. I'm pretty sure he doesn't want that legacy. So it wasn't just the money. It's about how you're going to be recognized and known. And this man has children. The world that your children grew up in, speaks a lot to how you want to be remembered. And do you really want your children to grow up in a world claiming that their dad is anti-Semitic? I mean, you really have to be willing to step away, walk away from it all. I mean, not just the money, the endorsements, what comes after your career. Whether you're a person who's looked up to, or whether you're a person that's scolded and named as a person who's anti-Semitic. Which, last time I checked, Tom, I believe Arabs are Semitic, Christians over in the Middle East are Semitic, and Jews are Semitic. How could anyone be anti-Semitic if you're part of any one of those groups? So if Kyrie believes that he's a black descendant of a black Israelite, how could he be anti-Jew or anti-Semitic when he believes that that's part of his heritage?
And Jimmy, that was the exact statement that he was making on the interview when they were attacking him.
That is true.
That is the exact point. He said, there's no way for me to know who I am and to be anti-Semitic. But they felt threatened, and they wanted to make an example of him. And so that's what they did. And the only reason they were able to make an example of him, which they did, is because and until the power of his community, who he represents, did not exercise its power swiftly enough. There were a few voices. We can call some of those few voices, but unfortunately, some of the talking heads from our community who represent mainstream platforms and who have big voices that are lifted up by their platforms overwhelm the smaller voices on the smaller platforms. And to your point, Jimmy, that's why we have to be willing to make the long-term commitment to building our own platforms and stop being beholden to other institutions and other platforms who represent their interests, not ours, which means we have to sacrifice the short term for the long term so our children's are not having this same conversation.
Correct. So, Tom, we're gonna take this moment to detour just a little bit. And my father practiced the Jewish religion. My mother did for a while they were married. I certainly did growing up for a while. I'm also quite familiar with the doctrine of the Black Israelites and what they believe. And let me say this, Tom, is that if you look at the history of the Hebrews, um, that they were attacked throughout history. I don't know if there was a civilization who wasn't at war with the Hebrews at any given point in time. They've been conquered by just about every major power in the world. You may ask yourself, why in the world such a small group of people be this centric to world powers at that time? And I believe if you go back to Genesis and Deuteronomy, that one of the promises made to the Israelites that they simply would comply with the covenant, that they would be given dominion over the world. And there were many who believed, whether they believed in the one God or not, they certainly believed that if the one God was true and was able to keep that promise, then that these people would be a threat. Well, Tom, here we are now, the descendants of those people. And last time I checked, a contract signed in blood survives the person who does the signing. It's called a blood contract. That means that contract's in place for life, which means that the original covenant with Moses from God is still in place. And there are those who believe that the reason black people are catching hell today, and you hear this charge that black people don't know who they are, your identity has been kept from you. Well, this is part of what they're saying. That's a coded message of Louis Farrakhan and some of the Muslims. That you don't know who you are. You know, that some of you are God's chosen people, still bound by a contract signed by your ancestors, and you're catching hell because you're not living up to the agreement. And God is not going to bless you until you do. But so my point is that, Tom, this is a powerful message for black people to understand if we take the time out to say we can't just gloss over this. This is not just a Kyrie versus the NBA versus Nike issue. This once again comes back to the very thing we've always been talking about. We don't know who we are. So what is wrong with us saying, okay, maybe now we should take more of a vested interest in doing some research, letting those who are professional researchers research this. You know, I hope there's a black think tank out there who will be willing to take up the issue. You know, let some of your scholars, you know, excuse me, let some of the scholars, regardless of color, debate the issue. Let's bring it all to the table, and we can start having conversations about it and put it out there for people to examine for themselves. Not saying you got to believe, not saying you got to believe it for or against, but at least it'll be out there. If you don't educate yourself when it's out there, that's on you. But this effort to shut it down like this just leads me to believe that there's more at stake here than just Kyrie, the NBA, and Nike. That really is what at stake is. We've gotten you black people in position. We got you just ignorant enough so we can control you, and we don't want to do anything that will somehow make you think that you are greater than what you are, or you should be doing more than what you are doing now because you believe that you're God's original people.
Jimmy, you're absolutely correct when you say there's a heck of a lot more at stake. You know, this is just at a micro level, a small example of what has been happening globally within our community. And, you know, folks, you know, there's a brother, if you've never heard of him before, by the name of James Small, look up some of his work. You know, he says, understand your history in order to erase the mystery. He said a little bit differently than I am saying, but he said, understand your history in order to erase the mystery. And so you have to start reading the Carter G. Woodson's, which I hope everybody has read Carter G. Woodson's, you know, classical and seminal work. You have to read John Hope Franklin. You have to read Joseph Ben Jochannan. And there are a ton of other scholars out there who, again, did not get support of the mainstream institutions, but their work is absolutely phenomenal in helping us understand our history and erasing the mystery. And Jimmy, ultimately, we have to be about building and controlling our institutions so that we can create and control our economies. Because without that, we have no conversation to be had. But it starts at an individual level, because this is something else that James Small says. Everything starts at the nuclear level in your household. And you build households in order to build communities.
Correct.
And you build communities in order to build nations. And so we have to have this code of conduct. We have to have our own personal libraries. We cannot just depend on our schools to educate our children and to nourish them and to lift and elevate them. Jimmy, I was on a flight earlier this week, and I was sitting next to a gentleman who was with his baby daughter. She was maybe a year old. I don't even think she was a year old because she could barely talk. But they were watching a video, and I don't know what the name of it was, but it looked like some little princess, and there were these other characters, and it was a Caucasian gentleman with his Caucasian daughter. And I saw that, and she was just totally engaged and enthralled, in the imagery around this young girl, this young princess, and talking to some very distinguished looking woman who was also Caucasian. Nothing wrong with that. But I began to think, wow, when I was growing up, we didn't have those types of stories. We were watching real stories. There weren't stories like us about our young girls and our young boys that esteemed them, that lifted them, because what that taught, Jimmy, at a very microeconomic level is that their kids, by the time they go into school in the very first grade or even in pre-garden, they are already esteemed with greatness. They are already esteemed with power. But when we are educating our children in institutions that are not committed to the facts or the origin of civilization or the origin of mankind and or the stories that were built based upon our communities and our stories, you can't expect them to get that story. So we, Jimmy, have to be about the business of educating our own children by the time that they're born. And even before that, Jimmy, singing to them while they're still in their mother's womb, so that they are being esteemed, so that they are being empowered, so, Jimmy, that they have a sense of dignity and pride and strength. So by the time they go to school, they're not having to have these conversations. They're not being concerned about making belittled and or called names and things of that nature, because they understand their power, they understand their esteem. And so in the future, Jimmy, I know that it's a slow evolution, but Jimmy, we can't expect anybody else to do this but ourselves. And so we can't, to your point, we can't expect government, who has created this situation. We can't expect Nike or the NBA or the NFL or IBM or any other institution not controlled or owned by us to build platforms, institutions, economies, and or esteem in our communities. We have to do that. And we have to embrace and put our arms around our own and take control and manage them, whether they're in the right or they're in the wrong, Jimmy. They belong to us, and we have to embrace that.
But Tom, think about if we really were to accept the information that's out there and fight for it. You'd have to retell and rewrite all these history books. Just look at the implication just for the Bible itself. No more white Jesus. You have Solomon in Psalms saying that he's black. You have Moses in the Israelites tracing their roots back to black people, and all the biblical figures up and down the Old and New Testament came out of one of those tribes from the Israelites. I mean, look at the implication of all of this, Tom. If any of this came out to be true, that all these folks were black, and all this time we've been celebrating the whiteness of all these biblical figures.
You're right, Jimmy, but I'm going to even push back on some of that, Jimmy, because a lot of this has already been written, but of course they're not in the institutions that many of us and or our children are being educated in. And so a lot of these books, many of these books, whether we're talking about religious, whether we're talking about technology, whether we're talking about, in any field of endeavor, Jimmy, a lot of these books have already been written. We just have to go out and seek the truth. We just have to go out and seek the facts. We have to support our own, Jimmy. I
Well,
mean, some of this stuff.
we're gonna stand up and fight for it, Tom.
Another great author who speaks in layman's terms, young cat still living, Anthony Browder. I mean, it's just a ton of brothers and sisters out there who have been creating this literature for decades upon decades since we were emancipated.
Well, Tom, we don't fight for it though. We allow Egypt to be carved out of Africa as if somehow it is separate, and so that it can't be traced back to African people. We don't look at the great contributions of the African civilizations. The Kush Empire being one of the first empires civilization, but yet we accept that the Sumerians and the Mesopotamians came first from out of Iran. I'm sorry, the Persian folks. My point is that we have subjugated Black history on a world stage, and there's only a few people who really fight for it, Tom. It's not enough. Here in America, Black folks are doing everything possible to cut any connection to Africa and any ties there. So that's the last thing in the world Black folks in America want, is somehow have roots that trace back. First of all, we don't like the stain of slavery. We don't like the stain of being captured as if we were weak and brought here to America. Well, we still think of Africans as being uncivilized and backwards people. And once again, no matter how much the world powers have exported Africa, we don't stand up for it. And rather than work together, and I know it's not all on us, Tom, a lot of it is also on African people too. I mean, there's no blame on both sides. But the point is that we're not two separate people, as if a lot of people think. We all come from oneness, and we need to be willing to accept all of our rich history. Our history did not start in 1619 when the first group of Africans were brought to America. Now, that's not the start of our history. We had a long, rich history before that. We're not connected with that history, Tom. So we don't know we're supposed to do great things because we don't have a history of doing great things. So anything that our captors here tell us, you can't educate Black boys. You're not meant to do this. You're not good in the boardroom. Black men, you need to step aside and let the Black woman take charge and lead things. I mean, pretty much whatever they tell us is what we go along with, rather than having the good common sense of knowing that we had a rich history before, we had a certain lifestyle and a culture that worked for us, that we are a communal people. We had order before you came along. Our history didn't start when white Europeans entered into Africa and discovered it for themselves to explore. We had civilizations before that. But Tom, we're not willing to embrace that and accept it. So we'll never ever be what we're supposed to be, and we'll forever be blind. And we'll be limited to accepting what white liberals in America tell us we are.
Well, Jimmy, that only is to the degree to which we will not continue to fight as we always have for the platforms and the institutions that will acknowledge what we have done that we know about. But again, it's a matter of us supporting other people's platforms, institutions, and systems, or extending, consolidating, and expanding, our own. And yes, we know that Black men and Black women do great things. Whether we talk about the Booker T. Washingtons of the world, or the Malcolms of the world, the W.E.B.s of the world, the Thurgoods of the world, the MLKs of the world, the Sojourner Truths of the world. I mean, we think about, all the great heroes and sheroes that have absolutely forced the United States to reconcile its principles of freedom, dignity, and of course the pursuit of economic empowerment in this country. And we just have to, there's nothing that is given to anyone, Jimmy. You have to take it. And so no one's going to hand it to us.
Nobody.
We got to take it. And if we talk about the greatness in our community, whether we talk about Ken Chenault, the former CEO of American Express. We talk about the current CEO of Merck, one of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the world. Of course, we former president, which if you look at the history, some say that Barack Obama was not the first black president of the United States. Do your history and your reading there. There are so many different things, but the only way that we're going to extend this history to the world and empower ourselves is to build our own institutions and platforms and stop being dependent on others, Jimmy.
Tom, we don't know we're supposed to do that, though.
And that's, well, many of us do, but it only takes one person.
So,
I mean, ideas last beyond people.
true.
Anyone who has read and understands the legacy of Dr. King understands. Anyone who understands the legacy of a Martin understands that, or a W.E.B. Ideas last beyond people. So it only takes one. We just have to continue to embrace our own. And
When
as
hear black men speak, we're doing our part to try to get the message out. But I would highly recommend, like we talked about on previous shows, of what could be done. It's time we have to start brainwashing our kids to understand that they were meant for greatness. God does not, whether you accept that you're a descendant of God's people or not, you are still made in his or her image, and you are meant for greatness. So do not waste your life listening to others tell you what you can do.
Yes, Jimmy, and with these last 3 minutes, we have to make our closing comments. Quinn, we want to thank everybody who is listening tonight, who listens to this show after tonight. Of course, Jimmy, we want to wish everybody on this Thanksgiving Eve a very happy and safe Thanksgiving to your family and or your loved ones. Any closing comments, Jimmy? Because we have about 3 minutes left on tonight's show.
Well, I'd already started mine just to say that, Tom, we have to start working on our kids to get them to understand that greatness is within them. And you can't allow others to limit your greatness to professional sports or entertainment. You know, that dynamic soul that exists in you for music and dance and sports can also be in the boardroom, Wall Street, can be in other areas, be outside of the few lanes that folks have defined for us. Understand that you are descendants of a great people, even outside of religion. It's still black people populated the world. Tom, Homo sapien life started in East Africa. Lucky enough, we mentioned this a little bit last show, that those people decided not to just stay where they were, not to be satisfied with having land, weather, food, that they ventured out and populated the world, and what the world would be if the Neanderthals were still around, if the Pekins were still around, if the Aborigines, which are few, were still around, if the Homo sapien did not become conqueror of the world, and you are the descendants of those people, and look at the shape that we're now finding ourselves in, Tom. We are the greatest species of humans on this planet that ever existed, and we've allowed others to somehow convince us that we're less than everybody else, when we are the mother and father of humanity. So we need to understand the truth, be willing to embrace it, be willing to speak it, and don't let anyone Kyrie you out of speaking the truth.
And I'll close, Jimmy, with, again, a restatement of the great James Small. Understand your history in order to erase the mystery. Ladies and gentlemen, we thank you again for joining us tonight. Have a happy and safe Thanksgiving, and we will see you next week. Because, Jimmy, if it is Wednesday night,
It's Black Men Speak, Tom.
good evening, everyone.